5 tips about cityscape photography. Hi, it's Peter here. Let's get right into the business. I came to this place here in Helsinki to see what this looks like. It's a very good photo opportunity. Maybe not right now, and I will talk later why not right now. But I came here to scout and see this place because all this empty area will be built. There will be some kind of buildings, I don't know really what kind, but there will be, and they're building those high rises here in Helsinki, which, you know, are not that high. The 36 stories I think is the highest one, but there will be 7 of them eventually. Now I think there is 3, and they are starting to build the 4th one in the front. But I promised you 5 tips about cityscape photography, and let's start with the first one. Well, it's planning and scouting. It's really important to plan your shots in a city because there are many things that you will find out why. The first, of course, is what the location looks like. And very good place of planning or start to plan is Google Maps, for example, and it's Street View. That's a really good place to start. It's usually quite accurate, and they are, improving it all the time and making it more contemporary instead of, well, that's not really the right word to say, but it's accurate and it's quite good for that. And especially if you go into a place where you don't know or you haven't been before, then it's really crucial to plan ahead. And of course, light is important. Like I'm here in the middle of the day and the sun is shining, and it's not most likely the best time to be here, but I wanted to see this place and see how it evolves and how it going to be in a photograph later at night. The sun actually will rise from behind those, almost behind those high rises from this spot, and that could be a very good time to photograph these buildings. And also the sun sets over there, so that's another time to do that. You might have a really nice dark sky behind them later. But I will come back here and actually make those images. Right now, I'm just for the video and for the scouting. And then the second one is about the light, the best time. And I already mentioned a few things that might be the best time to photograph. What I usually want to have is, now there's a lot of construction thing going on. There's some cars and all that kind of stuff going around. But what I was saying is that I will use apps to see where the sun comes from, and that's something really to consider. What I want to do usually is to have the sun come in front of me so that I will have the subject backlit, because then it will be a lot more interesting. Or side lighting is also very good, because then you can have all the structure on the buildings, and you will have really deep shadows also, or not too deep, but you know what I mean. The structure looks better, so if side lighting is quite good too, so that you have the best possible light. And usually what I prefer is have the light come quite low angle, which makes it more interesting. And that's why early mornings and late at night is a good time to photograph. And there is a video about that, about the night photography on my channel, which gives you more information about how to utilize, for example, blue hour, which is one of the best times to photograph, when you have really nice blue sky and you have the yellowish warm street lights, and that's usually the best time to photograph in a city. Let's see what I had next. Yeah, and then the exposure is really important, and especially if you photographing at night, you have really bright lights and really deep shadows. You might not be able to get all those tones at the same time, so you might need to bracket. And HDR is a very good way of making the bracketed shots. Your camera can do it automatically. Of course, you can do it everything manually if you want, but I found that HDR is a really good way of doing that. And you can even or set the camera so that it will make the HDR image for you. But I prefer doing it in post. Then I have more control over what the image will look like. But that's a very good way of making the exposure by bracketing when there are a lot of deep shadows and really bright highlights, because you don't want to blow out the highlights or have too much really dark shadows. Because cityscapes is something that you want to show what the city looks like, and sometimes it's not good to have really deep shadows. But of course it depends on if you want to do a bit different way, then of course you can do that. But I prefer having as much as possible visible when I'm making those cityscapes. And let's continue. And then of course we talk about the composition, foreground, middle and background. It's usually a good thing to have something in the foreground to give more depth to the scene. If there's a lot of empty space in the front, the image looks most likely a bit dull. And then of course in the middle something, and then you have the background. And usually the background is the sky. And what I prefer is, of course, if there are some clouds, maybe colors in the sky. Very seldom a dull sky like this right now is very interesting, or if you have just blue sky, it might not be that interesting, but some clouds and of course if the sun is setting, you might have really striking colors in the back, and that usually makes it more interesting. Of course, after the next tip, which will be the last one, I do have an extra tip. And next tip is about lens choices. Usually when we're photographing cityscapes, we want to use wide-angle lens. It's the same thing in landscapes, because cityscapes are like landscapes in a city. They're quite similar, so similar things apply. And what I was using in most of my images that I've shown you is a wide-angle some sort. But don't forget that also a longer telephoto lens can be really good, because it will squeeze the perspective. And that's something that might make a cityscape look really interesting. It's really condensed. Like these images from Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, it makes the city look totally different. And you can see the faraway bridges look a lot closer than they actually are. And they tell a bit of a different story of the city. It's more condensed. So the lens choice is actually quite important, but if you're photographing and walking around in the city, I would choose wide angle as my first choice. But of course, then not too wide, because you don't want the straight lines to be curved. So if you have possibility to use a really good lens that doesn't make any or have big distortions, it's a lot better in that sense. But those might be possible to correct in post. And then the extra tip, and that's about using Keystone comp. If you have the possibility to use so-called Keystone comp when you're photographing, that's a great thing to do, because most of us do not have a shift lens which will correct the perspective. Because if you tilt your camera upwards, you will have what's called a perspective distortion in a way, because the buildings get narrower when they high up. I don't know if I explained it correctly, but that might be sometimes totally fine, but sometimes it might not be. So using the Keystone comp, you can check that you have enough room to correct the perspective in post. You can shoot with the Keystone comp, but it will give you a JPEG. So what I usually do, I check if there is enough room for perspective correction so I can get this line straight, and then switch to or turn it off and just use RAW. That's something that you can really use, and it's a very handy feature in cameras. At least Olympus cameras have it, and I use it constantly in the urban environment. And here is the video about the nighttime photography I was talking about. You might want to watch that if you want to learn how to do cityscapes at night. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.